Hey folks, so I know one of my biggest sources of stress nowadays is watching the news every day. How do we deal with that? We'll talk about it coming right up. Hey folks, so I'm Doug Smith. I'm study director at the Secular Buddhist Association. That's secularbuddhism.org. And if you're interested in helping to promote a wiser and a kinder and a less stress-filled world, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll have talks like this out roughly once a week or twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. So if you're interested in these kinds of topics, consider it, and then you won't miss anything. So the news nowadays, it's the kind of thing that knocks us off our pins, I think. At least it does to me. You get up in the morning and first thing you do, or at least one of the first things I do, is to either look at the internet, look at the paper, watch television if I happen to be at a gym, let's say. And, every day it seems like there's something that's disturbing or makes you angry, makes you just less willing to get on with the day. But I think that there are three strategies we can look to, or three mindsets we can get ourselves into following some of the teachings that we've been talking about on this channel. The first one, to realize that the world changes, that there's change in everything, that when you're on an upward path, you can expect that that path is not going to be continuous. And I think to an extent we tend to think that if we're starting off on the right foot, that the next step will be the right direction and we'll end up where we want to be in short order. And on the downside, there's a sense that if we're starting off on the wrong foot, that we're never going to get out of that we're always going to be going the wrong direction, that nothing will ever change. And it's important to look back on history and to look forward on history and to think of it as a series of ups and downs, of things always changing. And so if today is bad, maybe tomorrow will be better. But the statistical pattern here is one that they call regression to the mean. That is, there's a general mean that we tend to go along, which is neither particularly good nor particularly bad. So if we're in a period that is particularly good, we can expect that eventually we're going to regress to that mean. And similarly, if we're in a place of news and political developments that are particularly bad, we can expect that eventually we're going to get better. But I have to say that the idea of regression to the mean is really not a promise. It's only a regularity. That is, the mean itself can change. It can change to the better, or it can change to the worse. So I think we have to be realistic that although all things change all the time, we're not guaranteed for them to change in a beneficial direction for us. A second point, which is related to this, has to do with I think a difference of viewpoint between the Western and, shall we say, the Buddhist or Indian viewpoint of history. In the Western view, history is, in a sense, always advancing upwards towards a goal which, at least religiously, involves a kind of final and complete victory of good over evil. There is, as they call, a teleology to history within the Western tradition. In the Indian tradition, history is thought of as more cyclical. It rises and falls and rises and falls. While this is a kind of teleology, it's a kind of process, it's a kind of repetition, the general picture here is that the universe, generally speaking, is not your friend. The universe is a kind of blind force out there which sometimes does good and sometimes doesn't. It sometimes helps you and sometimes doesn't. And nowadays in the news we're seeing, as I'm talking now, we've seen three recent hurricanes which have decimated parts of the United States and the Caribbean. We've seen an earthquake in Mexico, which has killed many people. And these kinds of things, of course, occur with some frequency and regularity. I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson, I believe, who was noting that, if you put a human down anywhere in the universe right now, in 99.99999% of the places, I mean a very large percentage, they wouldn't survive very long. Because most of the universe is, the vast majority, almost all of the universe, is not friendly to life. Another way of looking at this is to say all things pass. which of course isn't to mean that we shouldn't have a pleasurable life, or that we don't often have beautiful times and pleasurable times and happy times, but we should come with a wise awareness that those things do not persist. They have their peak and then they fall off and we're on to other things. That is to say that reality is not ultimately satisfactory in an ultimate sense. Again, it's satisfactory, it's happy, it's fun, it's pleasurable and pleasant for periods of time. But we make life more difficult by clinging to those and expecting them to persist forever. And the third point is that we should strive as much as we can not to take things personally. Of course, when it comes to political matters, differences of political opinion, we tend to take things personally, even if they're not obviously directed at us, because we see political developments as making our lives more difficult, at least potentially. And maybe actually, in fact. It's hard in those situations not to take them personally, not to feel that we are being personally not just affected, but targeted somehow. And so I think it can be both wiser and more helpful to us to see these socio-political forces which at times go against us as being larger than any one person, or larger than even any one culture. A lot of them are actually intercultural, even international. So keeping these three things in mind, that everything always changes, that the universe is not your friend, and not to take things personally, can, I think, help us to be more effective as we approach these problems and try to fix them. Because in all of this, I'm not suggesting that we should remain passive. What I am suggesting, however, is that we view these matters in a more wise way, such that we're able to calm ourselves down and become less stressed. Now, I mean, part of this may actually be to turn the news off sometimes, to decide that we've had enough of the news, that it's not helping us in any way. While I think it is to our benefit, and indeed I think we have an obligation to remain well informed about political matters. I mean, we should definitely watch the news. We should try as best we can to get our news from reputable sources, and if there are things that are questionable, to try to confirm those with reputable sources. Nevertheless, there is an extent to which that's useful, and there's also an extent to which it becomes a form of gossip. It can become a kind of intoxication. And this is one of the reasons, I think, why in the early texts, the Buddha, now admittedly talking to monastics, refers to a lot of what we would consider news as being wrong speech, as being gossip that monastics shouldn't engage in. Discussions about kings, about armies, about countries, about who's more powerful than whom. Watching the news is skillful insofar as it gives us information about what we should do, about what we can do, but it also can be very unskillful insofar as it simply increases our stress level and increases anger and increases greed in certain circumstances without giving us any outlet to deal with that. And of course, the background to all of this has to be to try to keep, as best we can, a heart of kindness when dealing with this material. It can be very, very difficult. But insofar as we can see the other person as a person who is attempting as best he can, or as best she can, to make the world a better place, even though they may be mired in ignorance and mired in the poisons of hatred and greed, nevertheless, they're trying to do what they can. Insofar as we can try to find areas of common purpose with people that we don't agree with, and come again with a spirit of kindness and with these kind of wise opinions that I've discussed today, I think we can at least, in our small way, make a difference, at least on a local level, a personal level. So I hope that's been a useful discussion to you. I know that for myself, as I say, the news has been a source of stress, and I expect it has been for many of you as well. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm really glad to have you here. And of course, thanks for all of your wonderful questions and comments. If you have any questions, or if you want to discuss more having to do with the news, I'd be interested in what you have to say. So just put it down below in the comments section, and I'll read it and would love to get back in touch with you about these things. So catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.